How much do we know about this COVID-19 virus?
We know that it's the same member of a larger family of these viruses known as coronaviruses. This is a third virus that has crossed. So we have SARS-1, MERS, and now SARS-2. We are beginning a completely uncharted journey with this virus. We don't understand a lot because the behavior is completely different.
I've included this index for you to jump around. This video might be a little overwhelming, but it's just the tip of the iceberg.
The president's top medical experts sharing with the nation the stark projections they shared with him as they aggressively pushed the president to extend those social distancing guidelines through the end of April.
There's no magic bullet. There's no magic vaccine or therapy. It's just behaviors.
One question now being reconsidered: should Americans wear masks as protection? Public health experts have repeatedly urged Americans not to wear face masks unless they're sick or caring for someone who is sick.
What the World Health Organization and the CDC have reaffirmed in the last few days is that they do not recommend the general public wear masks. Wearing a mask improperly can actually increase your risk of getting disease.
But the head of the CDC now says that guidance could be changing.
That's important because now you have individuals that may not have any symptoms that can contribute to transmission, and we have learned that, in fact, they do contribute to transmission.
Administration officials are now considering recommending that Americans wear homemade cloth masks, not those medical ones which are in short supply. Among the holdups, a concern that recommending masks could cause even worse shortages of N95 and other medical masks desperately needed by healthcare workers.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. This is a flu. This is like a flu. Anybody that needs a test gets a test. If an American's coming back or anybody's coming back, we're testing. We have a tremendous testing setup where people coming in have to be tested.
Each of those statements were either highly misleading or flatly wrong. And further misinformation in a primetime Oval Office address this week caused more confusion. This is a time we need to be able to trust the information coming from the federal government. And when any inaccurate information impairs our ability to understand what is happening and to do what is needed to halt the spread of this disease. This is not a matter of political spin. This is now a matter of life and death. When will life get back to normal? How long does this last?
You know, it's going to be a matter of, several weeks to few months, for sure. The way you interfere with that and not only diminish the peak of the curve, but even perhaps the duration, depends on the effectiveness in which you do the kinds of controls that we've been talking about, the containment and the mitigation. The one thing that we have to keep an eye on, John, is that China really dramatically did what we call social distancing. They just shut down the country. They just shut down the country. They just shut down the country. As they start getting back to normal personal interaction, I hope we don't see the second blip. I hope we don't see the second blip. But it's possible. But it's possible. But it's possible.
As the disease spreads, if it spreads.
It's not so much a question of if this will happen anymore. It's not so much a question of if this will happen anymore.
We're rapidly developing a vaccine.
We can't rely on a vaccine.
This will end. This will end.
This coronavirus will go well beyond this season into next season. This coronavirus will go well beyond this season into next season. I hope we don't see the second blip. I hope we don't see the second blip.
We have it so well under control.
It's likely that this virus will cause a pandemic.
The president first started talking about coronavirus compared to what he said tonight. Let's listen together.
We're finding very little problem, very little problem. Now, you treat this like a flu. This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear. We will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
We have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that get better just by sitting around and even going to work. Some of them go to work.
If you are sick or not feeling well, Stay home. Stay home. Stay home.
Include multiple waves of illness. 15 days, 18 months of illness. 15 days, 18 months. Which is it? This is going to be a couple of weeks, and then we'll see. Maybe July, and then hear about a plan for 18 months. What can you tell the American people?
Well, all of that is not incompatible with each of the things that was said. As I've told you before, Chris, when you have an outbreak like this, if you look historically and what has happened more recently in China and in South Korea, and now what's going on in a very dramatic way in Europe, you have the outbreak goes like this, and then it spares up like this, and then after a while it goes down. If it's left to its own devices, you'll get the maximum peak, a lot of suffering, a lot of illness, a lot of death. What our responsibility is, and what we are doing very, very vigorously right now, is to put into play the kinds of things that would blunt that curve. I've said that many, many times.
Right.
But when you blunt the curve by modifying society, particularly with the rather dramatic physical separations, which people call social distancing, you can blunt it, but it is unlikely that you're going to make it completely disappear. You can blunt it, but it is unlikely that you're going to make it completely disappear. If we're lucky, it will happen. If we're lucky, it will happen. But what more likely would happen is that we do this, go down, and if it's still around, we'd have to deal with it next season.
This coronavirus will go well beyond this season into next season.
That's the challenging issue. The good news about that will give us time, and as I've told you many times, the vaccine, whose trial we started just a couple of days ago, in a year to a year and a half, it is not untrue that in 18 months, or next season, we may see another flare.
I am surprised by the number of people out. I've just been out for a swim, and it's sort of like come out, get a bit of exercise, get outside and head home. I guess I'm more surprised by just the number of people who are just lazing around on the beach. The whole social distancing thing hasn't really taken hold in Bondi just yet, I would say.
Well, it's definitely not ideal. It is a worry with so many people all together, and I do think the whole world is probably looking at us right now thinking what a massive mistake that we're making. But I have noticed, looking at all the people, that there is some social distancing going on. Like, you'll notice that people aren't really touching each other. There's a breeze. I mean, I could make all these excuses. It's not what we should be doing, but
well, we don't normally have this sort of temperature, so I think people are taking advantage of the hot weather while they can, and a lot of people are being stuck indoors, so they probably think, oh, you know, I'll take my chance and go for a swim. But at the same time, I just think, well, here we are supposed to be excluding ourselves from big crowds. It sort of doesn't make sense. It sort of doesn't make sense. It sort of doesn't make sense.
Thank you for your time today, Dr. Jabala. Let's get straight into the virus. So, how much do we know about this COVID-19 virus?
We know that it's the same member of a larger family of these viruses known as coronaviruses. This is the third virus that has crossed. So we have SARS-1, MERS, and now SARS-2. We are beginning a completely uncharted journey with this virus. We don't understand a lot because the behavior is completely different. I was very surprised at the outbreak in China. the numbers of people that were infected in such a relatively small period of time. It's very unusual. There are so many talk out there, but it's not following the same rules as the other viruses. This virus is much more aggressive and much more lethal. And for every virus, there is a certain level of lethality. There is a lethal dose. There is how much of this virus you need to have in your lungs before it kills you or before it makes you sick. With this virus, it's not very clear. It's actually very disturbing. There have been some interesting reports that they've had people who were sick and they were cured. They released them out of the hospital and then they got reinfected. The truth is very simple. The assays that we do every day to test this virus, they can only test a certain limit. And if the virus level goes below that threshold, you're not going to detect it. Meaning you're going to release the patient and say you're healthy enough to leave. What I find alarming is we are releasing all these patients, telling them they are virus-free, and they go back to the community. It's not your average SARS, it's not your average MERS. Many people, including me, we start calling it a very mysterious, very cryptic virus because we don't understand it, and it doesn't seem to only attack the lungs, it seems to also attack the heart, and it seems also to attack the liver.
Not only old people or those with underlying health conditions actually develop this disease.
Now, the elderly are really the first category that get affected a lot because as we get older, our immune system declines. Between the elderly and the adolescent to probably 50, 60 years old, their lifestyles will dictate how vulnerable they are to a virus. What I have observed, which is very different to the MERS, is the rate of infection of young is lower. It doesn't mean that we don't have to close schools or we can let our kids outside play. It means that for now, these are the trends that we are observing.
There's so many unknowns about this COVID-19, and do you think this is actually becoming an obstacle for developing a vaccine?
Right now, we're in the middle of a storm, and a vaccine is not going to help. Right now, we're in the middle of a storm, and a vaccine is not going to help. Even if we have a vaccine today, it's not going to help. I think people don't realize that vaccines don't work for every individual that gets the vaccine. I think people don't realize that vaccines don't work for every individual that gets the vaccine. Vaccine is a preventative thing. Vaccine is really helping your immune system to kickstart. Your immune system is really what protecting you. Your immune system is really what protecting you. The vaccine is just helping, pointing to the immune system where to go. The information that we're lacking from China is about one individual, patient zero. Is about one individual, patient zero. The case in Italy, the cases in Iran, we have few cases in the United States, especially on the west coast of America, where we can't link that fingerprint to the virus from Wuhan. So without that information of that patient zero in Wuhan, we are in a bad situation to understand where this virus is going, where we can't link that fingerprint to the virus from Wuhan. So without that information of that patient zero in Wuhan, we are in a bad situation to understand where this virus is going. That information will be really critical for us to understand the evolution of this virus. That information will be really critical for us to understand the evolution of this virus. And that would really help us stop the spread, not to treat the virus, really stop the spread. Not to treat the virus, really stop the spread. Not to treat the virus, really stop the spread.
So you're saying that the patient zero is the key to understand the nature of this virus and contain this virus?
So, yes, patient zero is really critical to tell us what were these, what we call advantageous mutations that happened from the animal kingdom to the human. The one time it can infect us, that's the transition. It means now this virus figured out that the virus has the key now to borrow, not just to borrow our engine, to borrow the whole body as an engine for the virus to spread. The only way to keep it at bay, if you have a very good vaccine that makes antibodies that's going to neutralize the virus and clear it, that's wonderful. But for 20 years, many companies, many researchers have promised us a virus for SARS version 1. And we are in 2020 and this vaccine doesn't exist. Many companies, many researchers have promised us a virus for SARS version 1. And we are in 2020 and this vaccine doesn't exist. Many reasons. They have tried and they have identified difficulties that these viruses are not amenable to a vaccine. And because of that, they may need several years of research. Companies will not make vaccines if there is no one to buy it.
We are seeing a rapid spread of this virus, and the WHO declared that the spread of this virus is a pandemic. Why is this virus traveling so quickly around the world?
So this virus is traveling with new friends called bacteria. This bacteria love to live in confined environment like an airplane. They live on the hard surfaces, they live on the soft surfaces. We, as an unaware patients, we're going to sit on that seat on the plane, we're going to touch everything, we're going to read the magazine that 200 people read it before, and each time somebody touches the magazine, we leave some bacteria in there. And as soon as those people land in Italy, as an example, and get out of the airport, now they're going to spread this thing everywhere. But as soon as you get into a patient who are in the higher category of age and have underlying diseases, you start the factory. But the virus that woke up in Italy is much more aggressive than the one who left the plane from China. Mutations. So when it woke up, it mutated again.
Where coronavirus came from. Janelle Wang has the timeline.
Guangdong, China, November 2002. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS. More than 8,000 people get sick worldwide. 774 of them died. We now know SARS was a virus and most likely spread to people from wild animals.
The health ministry has reported 8 new cases of
Saudi Arabia, 10 years later. This time, it's Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS. 2,500 people were infected and more than 850 died, a 35% death rate. And again, it spread to humans from animals, possibly camels.
The virus continues to spread here in Asia.
Wuhan, China, December 2019. Another viral illness, possibly originating in a wild animal. Known as the coronavirus, it's spreading at lightning speed.
We're now on the verge of reaching 100,000 confirmed cases.
The first death was reported in China on January 11th. 2 days later, the virus was reported in Thailand. By the end of the month, it was in at least 8 countries, including the U.S., with the first case in Washington state.
I'm thankful that the man who tested positive for this virus acted so quickly and sought treatment.
In February, coronavirus got an official name, COVID-19. CO for corona, V for virus, D for disease, and 19 for 2019, the year it first appeared.
So when it woke up, it mutated again, and now it's much more aggressive that what's going on in Italy today, we can plot it on an exponential curve.
It's actually not recommended to wear a mask. What do you think about this?
The mask really provides 2 things. The psychology of wearing a mask, so you are less likely to touch your nose and your mouth and your eyes, and also not for you to give it to other people, it's what other people give you. And because people will give you things that you're not aware of, those things can land on your clothes, on your bag, on your cell phone, but you're wearing a mask. Even if you touch those things, the rate of infection is very low. So the risks by having a mask is very low. I was actually alarmed that everyone has a different story. I think in the United States, the CDC position was very clear because they are afraid of shortages down the road. If they, as an example, the church followers were all wearing masks, we wouldn't see 5,000-6,000 cases. In Italy, they don't wear masks. You saw where the numbers are. And I think that's where the mask plays this protective element, both psychologically and actually when you leave your home, which is your controlled environment, into the public environment outside that you can't control. You're part of it. I think the Korean CDC is absolutely correct. The way this virus behaved in the church, it's really behaving almost like a bacteria. It's like a non-hospital acquired bacterial infections, and the only remedy for that is hygiene. Korea is very good at disinfection. If they maintain this on course, I think the number of cases will start going down. Whether they got rid of the virus completely or not.
So what kind of efforts should we make to prevent the spread of more deadly viruses like COVID-19 in the future?
A very good question. I think it goes down to two critical aspects. One is preparedness, that each time a patient shows up in emergency with symptoms that no one has seen before, immediately they should be reported across all the healthcare institutions. This is the biggest mistake for MERS. If patient zero, when he showed up at Samsung, was isolated, we're done.
Coronaviruses in general are a large family of viruses that sport these spiky projections on their surfaces that resemble crowns. The coronavirus you've been hearing about on the news is called SARS-CoV-2, a new coronavirus that we have not seen in humans before. Some of them do. Viruses that cause SARS, MERS, and this new disease, COVID-19, all appear to have come from bats initially, and then pass through intermediate animals on their way to humans. The virus can be carried in respiratory droplets that are expelled when you cough or sneeze, but make sure to use your elbow rather than your hand, as you have a greater chance of putting the viruses onto surfaces if you use your. So this virus is transmitted through close contact with people. You could potentially pick up contaminants in that respect. This is kind of where face masks come in. So if you yourself are infected, wearing a face mask prevents the respiratory droplets from exiting your mouth and landing on everyone around you. Viruses aren't considered alive per se, but yes, it remains viable on these surfaces for a certain period of time, meaning it can infect you if you pick it up. Based on our understanding of other coronaviruses, in ideal conditions, these viruses can last on surfaces for up to, say, 9 days. Literally all they're built to do is infect. That's why they're not considered alive, because they replicate, but they don't have the machinery to do it themselves. Common household disinfectants like alcohol-based cleaners and bleach should be effective at wiping the virus off of surfaces. The easiest way to protect yourself from catching this virus is to wash your hands often and thoroughly. So for at least 20 seconds with soap. So this virus is an enveloped virus, which means it has like a fatty membrane. The normal soaps break down the fats and basically like disarm the virus in that way. Other coronaviruses, we've seen that they become less transmissible in warmer weather. So that may be also true of this virus, but truly we don't know yet.
Hey everybody, it's Steve from Asian Boss. With the whole world seemingly on lockdown, there's a lot of panic and misinformation that's going around about the coronavirus. South Korea is widely acknowledged for having had one of the best responses to contain the pandemic. And yes, everybody here is wearing a mask, but that doesn't mean they're all sick. They're just protecting themselves before getting tested, which itself is widely available, as you can see. It's probably not an exaggeration to say that it is one of the safest countries to be in right now, relatively speaking, of course. If you're wondering what it is that Korea has done that was so effective, and also want to get the most accurate information on the coronavirus, today we've come to Korea University Guro Hospital to talk with the most prominent coronavirus expert in the country. He's waiting for us as we speak, so let's go ask him as many questions as we can. 오늘 이렇게 시간 내주셔서 정말 감사합니다, 교수님. 우선 간단하게 본인 소개 좀 부탁드려도 될까요?
예, 제가 이제 근무하고 있는 직장은 고려대학교 의과대학 서울에 있습니다. 구로병원의 감염내과 교수로 있습니다. 제가 이제 감염내과 의사가 된 지는 이제 1990년부터 한 30년 됐습니다. 그러니까 30년 동안 여러 가지 그 중요한 감염병들, 결핵, 에이즈, 홍역, 그리고 2003년 사스, 2009년 신종 인플루엔자 팬데믹, 또 2014년 이볼라, 2015년 머스 아웃브레이크까지 다 경험해서 이번 30년 동안 쭉 경험한 것 중에 이번 코비드-19 팬데믹이 사실 가장 어려운 과제가 된 것 같습니다. 이거 처음 맞닥뜨리는 신종 코로나 바이러스죠. 그렇다 보니까 우리가 치료제도 없고 백신도 없고 그래서 모든 나라가 지금 아주 그 어떤 환자 폭증에 따라서 특히 지금 유럽이 가장 심하죠. 미국도 지금 뉴욕을 비롯한 대도시에서 환자가 많이 발생하고 있죠. 그래서 상당히 위협이다 그런 상황입니다. 이게 나라마다 다릅니다. 치사율은. 왜냐하면 이제 같은 바이러스지만 그 나라의 방역 시스템, 그 나라의 의료기관의 치료 수준. 한국에서는 검사를 많이 하다 보니까 전체 한 9,000명, 약 9,000명의 확진자 중에 20%가 무증상 환자예요.
예.
신종 바이러스이기 때문에 백신도 없고 치료제도 없기 때문에 오로지 바이러스 감염됐을 때 싸울 수 있는 무기는 본인의 면역 방어 시스템이에요. 지금 우리나라 한국 자료 보면 전체 9,000명 중에 20%가 증상이 없어요. 이게 이제 함정이죠, 어떻게 보면. 증상이 없으면서도 전염성이 있기 때문에 이게 함정이라는 거죠.
그러면 이제 한번 걸렸어요. 난 다음에 또 걸릴 수 있는 건가요?
네. 지금 그게 이제 굉장히 두려운 거죠. 지금 아직 모르는 부분이 많아요. 보통 우리가 어떤 병에 걸리고 나면 항체가 생깁니다. 대개 2주 정도 되면 항체가 생겨요. 그 다음에 같은 병에 안 걸려요. 지금 코로나19의 경우는 코로나19를 걸리고 나서 회복을 해서 퇴원했어요. 근데 한 5일 내지 7일 뒤에 다시 증상이 나오고 바이러스가 또 나오는 그런 재발 사례들이 있거든요. 그런 경우들이 가끔 있습니다.
그러면 이 코로나19라는 게 어떻게 걸리는 거예요? 예를 들어서 사람들의 인식은 이게 내가 숨만 내쉬어도 걸린다. 아니면 이게 무슨 어떤 그 내 얼굴에 재채기를 해야지만 걸리는 거다.
되게 이제 크게 세 가지입니다. 이 주로 이게 호흡기로 바이러스가 들어와서 염증을 일으키면서 열이 나고 기침하고 호흡곤란 있고 이게 이제 주증상인데 그러면 환자가 이제 기침 재채기를 하면 드랍플래시라고 비말이라는 게 이렇게 나옵니다.
침 튀기는 거잖아요.
예, 침 튀는 건데 그 비말이라는 거는 그 침방울이 5마이크론보다 큰 거를 드랍플렛 비말이라고 합니다. 그 안에 수많은 바이러스가 포함되어 있죠. 침방울에. 그 환자로부터 나오는 침방울에. 근데 이제 5마이크론보다 크다 보니까 이게 기침 재채기를 하면 이게 포물선을 그리면서 1m 이내 아니면 멀면은 뭐 2m 이내에 떨어지죠. 그러면 눈이나 코나 입의 점막으로 바이러스가 침투하는 거예요.
눈으로도 들어갈 수가
그렇죠.
있는 거네요.
네, 점막으로. 소문에 뭐 쳐다만 봐도 걸린다라고 하는데 그건 잘못된 정보고.
아니면 그냥 공기로 이렇게 그 사람이 지나갔는데
네.
그 다음에 한참 있다가 지나가면 뭐 걸린다 약간.
그건 이제 공기는 좀 다른 거라 이제 다시 설명을 드릴 텐데 가장 흔한 거는 이렇게 비말로 기침 재채기로 전파하는 게 하나고 두 번째는 그 콧물 재채기가 있으면 우리가 손으로 이렇게 비비잖아요. 알게 모르게 무의식적으로. 그럼 손에 콧물이 묻으면서 바이러스가 묻는단 말이에요. 그럼 그걸로 제가 악수를 한다. 그러면 이제 악수를 통해서 접촉 전파가 되는 거죠. 이게 두 번째고 또 하나는 제가 이제 환자가 기침 재채기를 하면 그 비말이 이런 탁자라든지 또 아니면 손잡이라든지 컴퓨터 키보드라든지 이런 데 묻어요. 그러면 이 짧으면 수시간, 길면 3, 4일 그 이상 장기간
3, 4일
살아있어요. 네.
예를 들어서 이런데 이제 누가 이렇게 만졌어요.
네.
그럼 이게 며칠 동안 가나요, 이게?
이런 탁자는 한 3일 정도 가죠. 종이나 이런 옷 같은 텍스타일에 바이러스가 묻으면 생존 기간이 좀 상당히 짧아요.
한 몇 시간이면 그럼?
뭐 종이 같은 경우는 하루 정도.
예.
네. 바이러스가 붙는 리셉터가 있어요. ACE2 리셉터라고. 거기 붙어야지 바이러스가 들어가요. 피부에는 없어요. 피부는 이게 일종의 그 배리어예요. 방어막이라고. 그러니까 귀로는 안 들어가죠.
그러면 지금 이 마스크를 하는 게 얼마나 효과가 있나요?
마스크 효과 있죠.
있습니다. 예,
그러니까 왜냐면 2003년 사스 때도 그랬고, 그러니까 홍콩에서 그 싱가포르, 캐나다, 대만, 중국에서 사스 때 의료진들이 많이 감염됐거든요. 처음에는 모르고서. 지금도 중국 우한에라든지 이태리도 의료진 많이 감염됐잖아요. 그때도 연구를 해보니까 마스크 쓰고 손 씻기 한 의료진이 안 한 의료진보다 감염률이 현저히 낮아요. 소위 서구사회, 유럽이나 미국 이런 데는 일반인들 안 쓰잖아요.
예.
전 그게 좀 이상하다고 보는데, 그렇게 이제 미국 서전 제너럴이 마스크 쓸 필요 없다. 또 뭐 WHO에서도 마스크를 일반 사람들한테 권고하지 않는다 그러니까 저는 그게 아니다. 그 트위터인가 어디 올린 거 보니까 그걸 잘 해석을 해야 돼. 보면 일반인들이 마스크를 그렇게 살려고 애를 쓰는데 그럴 필요 없다. 마스크는 의료진이 제일 필요하다. 의료진이 마스크가 없으면 더 위험해질 수가 있다. 환자를 진료를 못하니까. 그러니까 거기에 보면은 이 미국처럼 마스크가 부족한 상황에서 제일 우선순위는 의료진한테 가야 되는데,
그러니까 이제 그 공급이 모자르니까.
그렇죠. 그래서 그렇게 얘기한 거지.
원래 쓰긴 써야 되는데 제가 가지고 있는 게 이게 지금 KF94거든요. 그러니까 이게 저는 N95랑 비슷하다고 보는데.
컴패터블한 거죠. KF94를 쓴 건 N95를 쓰는 거나 마찬가지니까 의료진한테 필요한 걸 일반인들이 쓰는 거예요.
근데 제가 보기에는 길거리는 다 대부분 사람들이 요즘은 이제 KF94를 쓰고 있거든요. 어쨌든 결론은 이거를 쓰면은 확실히 보호가 되긴 하는 거네요.
그럼요. 아니 왜 의료진들이 병원에서 마스크를 못 쓰겠어요? 예방이 되니까 쓰는 거지. 그리고 이미 사스나 메르스 때 다 입증이 됐다고요.
한국에서 사람들이 이렇게 마스크를 많이 쓰고 다니기 때문에 그만큼 감염이 좀 덜하다고 봐도 되는 거예요.
그럼요. 그러니까 WHO도 그 마스크에 대한 권고사항에 일반인들이 마스크 착용을 권고하지 않는다. 단 동양권에서는 문화적 차이로 마스크를 권고하기도 한다. 이렇게 돼 있는데 사실 그것도 좀 문제가 있죠. 왜냐하면 분명히 마스크가 예방 효과가 있는데 지금 뭐 중국이나 홍콩이나 일본이나 한국이나 다 아시아권은 마스크 쓰잖아요. 지금 많은 나라들이 유럽이나 미국 환자가 급작스럽게 늘어서 지금 난리잖아요. 한국은 그나마 지금 환자가 그렇게 많지 않은 이유 중에 하나가 이런 마스크 착용, 또 손 씻기 열심히 하는 거. 손 씻기와 마스크 착용이 예방이 되는구나. 한국, 싱가포르, 대만, 홍콩이 공통적으로 잘하는 이유, 선방하고 있는 이유 중에 하나가 홍콩, 싱가포르, 대만도 2003년 사스 때 큰 곤욕을 치러서 이미 이런 코로나19 유행이 벌어지면 병원도 문제고 일반 시민들도 많이 희생된다는 걸 알고 있어서 이미 그런 경각심이 있는 거예요. 교훈이 있는 거죠. 아랑곳하지도 않고 마스크 쓰지 않죠, 당연히. 그 밀폐된 공간에서 뭐 춤도 추고 술도 마시고 왁자지껄 떠드니까 잘 안 지킨단 말이에요. 뭐 PC방, 노래방. 사실은 이 10대, 20대 특히 우리나라에서 코로나19 환자의 약 30%가 20대에서 발생하고 있어요.
근데 그럴 확률이 몇 퍼센트 정도 된다고 생각하세요, 현재?
그때보다는 뭐 낮아서 한 10%? 10% 정도. 그보다 미만이겠죠. 왜냐면 그때 2003년은 벌써 17년 전이에요. 그때는 한국 여행이 그렇게 활발하지 않았어요. 지금은 전 세계가 일종의 국경이 없잖아요. 또 하나 시나리오는 지금 얘기한 대로 일단은 뭐 여름까지 유행하고 일단 북반구는 끝난 다음에 이제 남반구로 가는 거예요. 호주라든지 저쪽 남아프리카 공화국 남미는 그때 겨울이 되거든요. 그리고 또 이제 10월, 11월에 이제 북반구로 또 오는 거죠. 우리 독감처럼, 계절 독감처럼 순환을 하는 거예요.
It was one of the first countries to be hit with coronavirus. But Singapore's claiming success in holding back the pandemic.
I'd rather be here than almost any other country at the moment.
The island state kept a lid on infections without locking down.
35.7, you're welcome to Duckland.
And it's made people feel safe at work and school.
We are quite hopeful that we will be able to contain this.
Of the viral pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan, China.
Their close links to mainland China put them in the first firing line of the coronavirus epidemic. On January 23, Singapore's outbreak began.
We have confirmed the first case of Wuhan novel coronavirus patient in Singapore.
It was just 2 days before the first case was recorded in Australia. But while Western nations were waiting to see how serious the problem became, Singapore was already on a war footing.
From the moment, end of December, when we heard that this was going on in China, we slipped into action very quickly.
Australian expatriate Professor Dale Fisher is an infectious diseases expert at Singapore's National University Hospital and a key advisor to the World Health Organization.
I remember on January the 1st about having the emergency department start to look out for people. Labs were in place for our first case, and every public hospital laboratory was capable of doing tests. So we ramped up very quickly. And a virus that was bringing China to its knees, we had a lot of respect for.
Okay, well, what is that main message you want to get out there?
In general, it's that this disease can be contained. And if you don't contain it, then you can see the ramifications. That's called Wuhan. That's called Italy. But if you do contain it, that's called Singapore. That's called Korea, Hong Kong, now China, now that they've brought it under control. So that's my strongest message, is that it can be contained and everyone has a different role to play.
The government's response was visible within days of the first infection.
Hello.
Students and visitors had to pass temperature checks to be admitted to schools. Classrooms were fully stocked with hand sanitizer. Children were taught early how to avoid infection.
The newspaper telling us that the virus is now in Singapore. Coronavirus can make us sick. It can make us have a runny nose. Also, it might make us cough. How should we cough if we need to? Into our elbow. Very good.
At the same time, the government was activating a network of nearly 900 health clinics to be the first line of treatment. They're called Public Health Preparedness Clinics, or PHPCs, and they're medical centres or general practices equipped in advance to deal with a major outbreak.
Now enter coronavirus. Coronavirus has its own genome. It is made out of RNA, and that RNA just happens to have a 5' head and a poly A tail. So when it pops into the cytosol, it's going to be read by those same ribosomes that can't tell the difference. Except this time, instead of making a protein that's useful to your cell, this RNA that comes out of the virus is going to make something called a RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. And it's this enzyme right here that is going to read from the 3' end to the 5' end of the viral RNA and replicate it. So this RNA-dependent RNA polymerase makes more viral genomes. It's also known as replicase for that reason.
Virus and everything. I don't know where we're headed. I don't know what's coming. I do know 2020, and I don't know where it's going to take us. I don't know what it's going to be like over the next few weeks, few months, the rest of the year. But I know one thing: if you don't grow a garden this year, you need to. I'm not a major prepper. I'm not a doomsday prepper, nothing like that. But I do know, and every single one of you watching this know, because you've seen over the last couple weeks how fast our food supply can be disrupted because of the toilet paper issue, and it disappeared from almost every store in America overnight, and people are fighting over toilet paper. What happens when this virus disrupts our food supply?
If you live in the United States, you almost certainly eat genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Thus far, it's just plants, though pretty much every kind of meat on the market was likely fed with GM corn at some point. And it won't be long before the animals themselves are genetically modified. GMOs are everywhere in the US, pretty much literally. 95% of sugar beets, 88% of corn, 94% of soybeans grown in the US contain traits like being insect resistant or herbicide resistant that were engineered into them.
But what does this label really reveal about your food?
With many topics in the food industry, it's something to educate yourself on and then make that decision at a personal level.
If your food has GMOs, it means the plant, crop, or seed has in some way been altered.
Potentially to make it resistant to more insects or resistant even to the pesticides used for those insects.
But what does that mean for the consumer?
The thing about GMOs is one thing they find is those type of foods may have more pesticides used on them because they're resistant to that. So our bodies may react to those pesticides. And they find it might change our microbiome. So if you're having digestive issues or other allergies, then it may cause internal issues that we're not necessarily thinking of.